St. Lucie.
And do you remember how far your contracts go out?
Yeah, they go for the life of the plant. Now, one of the challenges you have in that, for example, the St. Lucie plant, when they just re-energized that and added capacity, that pushes the years out for that plant, and I think it's 20 years. So the life of the plant is one of those that is relative on that steering of, and also if you do refinancing, and for example, on the Stanton 1 or Stanton 2 plant, if they do refinancing, in some cases, they extend the time of that financing in order to get the payments down, which helps in your cost of energy, but your exposure goes that much longer.
And the reason I'm asking, just for the UAB board too, and I'll get you this information, I don't know if you've seen it or not, our contract, St. Lucie contract goes to 2027, and Stanton 1 goes to 2022. So that's
right now, with the latest financing at St. Lucie, you're now to 2066.
okay. And this was actually
The others are
documentation.
53. With proposed refinancing, we're way out there now, guys.
Okay, and that's, I mean, this was August 17, 2012, so I'm just making sure that, we know exactly what's on the table here, and that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, most power plants are somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 years, but the way that technology is changing, you can go in, re-energize a plant, and get considerably more life out of it.
Mr. Zerny?
Do you think you have some deficiencies in your transmission and distribution system, and how redundant is it?
It's very redundant. No, I don't think, our biggest issue is that we're isolated, so we cannot carry our total capacity. The transmission is there. Again, another element of our contract with Florida Power and Light is that they will build that transmission at their cost and connect from the south to us. That will enable them to take down our power plant.
That's a whole other process too, though.
Yes, sir, it is. It is a process.
Ms. Maxwell?
Just to follow up to Commissioner Amarosa's question.
Can you sort of into the microphone? So
Yeah,
we don't hear
sure. I've got just some deep concerns about whether or not that's applicable. The extension. I talked to the city manager about this. I think we definitely need to know, whether we're automatically obligated for those additional years. We're finding there's lots of these agreements that are very troubling.
And just to comment on that, that's one of the reasons I brought it up, because again, this documentation was given to us August 17, 2012, and we haven't seen or heard anything since then. You may have as a UAB board, but we need that updated information so we're on the same plane. And we're hearing from Councilwoman.
Your representative on your FMPA board should be advising you that every time when they're voting for extending these loan agreements, that they are extending your terms out.
And we're hearing from somebody that actually has
Those
that
votes,
information.
were taken, much earlier in the year.
Okay,
So I have the date for Stanton and for St. Lucie. They moved out all those 3 projects. And I'm not sure which ones y'all are involved in. Stanton
And St. Lucie. And St. Lucie.
and St. Lucie. Yeah, St. Lucie I think is to 43, then Stanton is to 45. So you're not as bad. It's 2 to 66.
Thank you.
Clay, do you have any update on that?
I do not.
You do not?
I think those were taken before I was a member,
Okay.
I think they were.
Commissioner Boyd?
and I don't remember.
Those are issues where you really need to have someone look at those contracts. That's why I said at the beginning that I'm trying to find the attorney that can shuffle through and give you the advice as to what is your liability. I will tell you though, when you get into the discussions and negotiations, there's a lot of interpretation there, but at least you have the grounds in which to move forward.
Commissioner Boyd?
Yeah, I've got several questions. One of them I think we've been addressing, which was, is your deal basically got legal clearance and it's going to go through? And I think the answer is no. There's still quite a bit of moving parts and things that are being sorted out. That's been complicated and you're not quite to the end of the tunnel. Is that accurate?
That is very true. Patience is probably the operative word in this process. But yes, every time we open up another contract, then there's going to be elements of that contract. And so we're literally going line by line by line. But yes, there are still complications.
and it sounds like the corollary to that is that it's extremely important to get very good legal advice because the exposure, potential exposure to the city is quite large.
Absolutely. Also, you need legal advice. John Igo is a very good attorney, but you need to have someone that you all feel comfortable with and confident in when he gives you an opinion. And that's gonna be the challenge. Because in the long haul, as experienced in Vero Beach and any place else I've worked, over the long haul, attitudes start changing, positions start changing, and you've got to sort of make sure you stay the course in the process, because it is one of those. And so therefore, having the competent attorney and the competent engineer and anyone else that you need to put the faith in is very important.
Okay. Yeah, a couple more. If I want to make sure, because it was quite a number for me. If I understood right earlier, you said that basically the net, by the time you pay off all the various things that you've discussed, the net of selling it was going to be, your hope was, I think you mentioned about 10 million, and your hope was 35 million.
Yes, that would be the cash we would have on hand at the end of the transaction.
Because they get to walk the.
We get to keep our reserves, that's correct, and accounts receivable.
So we're not looking at hundreds of millions by any means.
Oh,
We're looking
no,
at-
sir, no, sir. When you exit the utility, if somebody has an expectation that you're gonna collect, 40 years of $6 million transfers, it's not gonna happen. It's a value of a transaction that you're doing on the value of the system. You will have to, and it's important to know, the great majority of cities in this country operate without electric utilities, so it's not something that's brand new to the world. But once you give that up, then you've got to find out where your revenue streams are gonna be at the same time what you're gonna do. But the answer to the question is, we look at it as a way of getting us over the bump. We are also looking in our business model, taking that money and paying off our pension plans, because we have the deficits in our benefit, and we're benefit program. We're probably gonna go to a system where we just make contributions to like a deferred comp or something.
And just clarifying that, so a portion of the 35 million you're thinking of using to pay other pension, not the electric.
That's correct. The electric goes with the transaction. The council's decisions will be as to how we use that money. In our discussions and in our business model, one of the exposures we have is that unfunded pension liability for the other general employees.
And then I got one more, and then maybe I can let somebody else come back to the last one. Has anyone done a in-depth sort of study, because you mentioned that ad valorem is sort of your other revenue stream, and you recognize that as you get rid of the utility, you're diminishing the revenue stream to the city, but you still have services that you need to provide. You think some of the services will go down a little because you're not doing customer service and so on. But I think you're envisioning a certain amount of a shortfall, which is gonna have to come from ad valorem. Has anyone done a formal study of saying, in the shoes of a resident, an average resident, some range of residents, the net effect, by the time you get a cheaper FP&L price, but you increase, the increases that you need to do to provide the same level of city services, what's it gonna look like overall? Has anybody done that study? Have you asked for that?
Let me tell you, a lot of people have done the study. There's a lot of spreadsheets that are out there. And one of those claims that we are spending about $2 million a month, round numbers, in excess for the purchase of our power. So if the average person, and if you say that's true, if you're paying 23% more for your electricity, then there are numbers that show what you would save if you went to Florida Power Light. The city of Vero Beach, as an example, because we bill our utilities just like we do anybody else, we would save somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 a year on our water plant. So if you put an ad valorem tax equal to that, and in our case, if your ad valorem taxes went up 25%, we would probably cover almost everything our shortfall would be. But at the same time, we're going to do organizational structures. For example, We're contracting out some of our mowing. We're gonna be looking at streamlining a lot of the stuff. For example, in our water utility, we contracted out all of our lab work, which saved us in the neighborhood of $600,000. And we're looking at every department as to how we do that. We will be dropping 31 positions in our city this year, assuming that the budget passes as it is now. And so we have taken those positions, contracted some of that out, and at the same time looked at issues, for example, in our recreation. We contribute somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 a year to Little League. Typically speaking, that wasn't a big deal, but going down through there, we found 73% of the people, the kids playing in Little League happen to be in the unincorporated areas. So it's our opinion that the county should pay 73% of the cost of operation of that Little League program. So the city council has written a letter to the county expressing that same concern, is that we need to find where our cost centers are, what are driving those cost centers. Another issue in recreation, we have a person who does tennis, and we have a tennis pro, but he's independent, he's an independent contractor, it doesn't cost us any money, but the person who sits in there and arranges for the tournaments and all that other stuff was costing us money. The first budget that I put forward was going to reduce her hours. Well, there was a big outcry from those who participated in that program. They said, we're willing to pay more. We're going to implement higher charges. That person's going to have to justify that position through the fees that she can raise in order to pay that salary. So we're looking at it from a different business model than we have historically. Does that mean that we're going to lower services? We may not teach tennis, or the tennis pro may set his own schedule or something, I don't know. We are looking, for example, at our leisure square, which is a swimming pool area. It costs us somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 a month to heat the pool. In the wintertime, there's not that many people who even go for the heated pool. We've also proposed in our budget, we're going to close that pool on Sundays because we found there was a very little participation. So it's made us look internally at what we do and how we do it, and then try to find ways of reducing those costs. At the end of the day, it's going to be a different organizational structure.
Follow-up?
A direct follow-up. If you'd like to, if you've got any consulting professional services money, we'd be happy to consult with you. We let go of a bunch of people when we're slowly in the process of rethinking that, and we also did mowing contracts, and
Bring it back.
yeah. So we've, it sounds like we're a couple years ahead of you on some of these things, and I'm sure we'd be happy to share experience.
Right, and we're
Didn't
going
always
through a
work.
painful process. It doesn't, I agree. But, for example, we're debating now a patrol officer in our police department, and that's going to be something that the council will have to deal with when it comes up in the budget.
Talk to us.
You're right.
We've been through all of these.
We'll be each other's guinea pig. Ms. Maxwell?
Just on the flip side of that, has anyone done any assessment of what the increase in values might be? Property values, which would add to the overall revenue base, not necessarily having to increase taxes, because of the perception that you're on par with the adjacent utility. So that, businesses may move in, residents may move in. Have you done any assessment of that?
Oh, we have. We're pretty well built out. It would be very difficult to see a large in-migration. Now, surrounding our city in the unincorporated areas, which 60% of our customer base is outside our city. So you might see something like that happen, but within the corporate limits, it's pretty condensed, at the same time, pretty well built out. And I would not envision that we're going to have big corporate enterprises because our electric rates would be floor, tar, and light. I think that in many cases, that the component of the electric charge is relatively small in many businesses.
But even taking the residential side, just values, just the we have an issue with people perceiving that because of the utilities, that they don't want to move here. And as a consequence, our property values are artificially depressed. So you take that issue away.
We have the same issue that a lot of the realtors tell us, that they show properties in the unincorporated areas outside of the city of Vero Beach electric utility, which is accurate. But the fact of the matter is many of the highly high demand properties happen to be within the corporate limits. And so we have not really seen, for example, people leaving Central Beach and going to the mainland. outside on utilities. Does it drive the price up? Possibly, but I think it would be marginal. We have not done that study.
Oh, Ms. Clark?
I have a question about the contribution to the general fund. Yeah, you mentioned 4 to 5 million. Has that consistently been 4 to 5 million or only in recent years?
Some years it had been higher, and most years it probably didn't get much lower than that. But historically speaking, in the city of Vero Beach, depending on the needs of the general fund, a lot of times you make transfers from the electric utility.
If I could just ask a quick follow-up to that, city manager, we were at a fixed rate for many years, right? And then that changed, when did that change? Do you know?
I think I can answer that. Like 2 years ago, we went from 10% to 8%.
Okay.
2 years ago.
But when did it start to fluctuate? Wasn't it always a fixed,
Yes,
it was always a fixed rate of what
Well-
percentage?
that's my understanding.
Of what percentage?
10%.
10%, okay. And we switched to 8%. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Zerdy?
How much reduction do you think in the price to your customers are you anticipating in their bill, or like an average 1,000 kilowatt, or some, do you have an idea of that?
Yeah, I think it would come down 1,000 kilowatts, somewhere in the neighborhood of $23, $24.
Okay, and so what percent might that be in their bill?
23,
Oh.
24%.
23 or 24% reduction?
Typical
Yeah, we're-
sales, That's the planning number.
And how,
That's our, what we see as our real rate differentials.
okay, and then how close to the city's target of what they thought they want to get for the sales price versus what you all got to?
Depends on who you talk to. Everybody I had some folks that came to me and said, hey, you insure the power plant along for 200 million, so the system's gotta be worth 300 million. And you had people that came to me and said that GAI study undervalued some of the wires and the poles. And I had other people who said, oh, you inflated the number in order to keep the sale from going through. So the answer to the question is, you never get real consistency. It's a business transaction, and the best that you can do is you negotiate a price, you take it to the board of directors, i.e. the city council, they either say it's fair or it's not fair.
Commissioner Harrison?
You had mentioned that your goal with the sale to FPL is to actually bring your rates down to an FPL level. The 23 that we keep hearing, is that the difference between your rates and FPL? Is that where you are now?
Yes, sir.
It's
If you look
23.
at our rate structure, it's right at 23% rate differential.
Okay, because we as a commission and a mayor have already made a commitment, and it's actually on our agenda tonight, to actually be rate compared to FPL within 5 years. So we've made that commitment from here, and we're working to try to make that happen before we even look at a sale. So
Yeah, and
we
I'm not-
identified that too.
a sale is not your only option in the process. Now, the city of Lakeland is about the only municipal utility that comes close to FPL, and they're pretty well on the numbers. And they're a large enough system to be able to do that. But they've been very efficient, and they brought theirs down, and they did it in the competitive nature. And again, when you look at this, of what you're gonna do, the future of your utility, there are many, many different variations, and you need to sort of keep, an open mind. If you're not driven by, I want the power plant down and I want FPL rates. But I will assure you that if you say you want FPL rates, which again are probably the lowest, some of the lowest in the country, then you're gonna be dealing with FPL. There's very few companies that can really compete with them, especially on the island in the area. So you would have to sort of make that as a judgment, and that would be one of your limitations.
Commissioner McGuire?
Yeah, I was wondering about what sort of demand reduction, I think is the technical term, but energy conservation or efficiency kinds of things at the usage level that Bureau has been involved in prior to the sale. Has that been looked at all?
Yes, we have done home inspections for energy, but we do not offer any discounts. That's another thing that Florida Power and Light brings to the table, is they have energy managers and this kind of stuff. We have not, our utility is too small in order to really be effective at that. We do offer to go in, look at their meters and do some energy efficiencies, but it's more cosmetic than anything else.
And follow up on that, I mean, I was intrigued that just recently, where were the 6th or something, just within the last week, William Ruckelhaus, Lee Thomas, William Riley, and Christine Whitman, all former EPA administrators under Republican administrations, put out an op-ed in the New York Times, a Republican case for climate action. And one of the things they say is that, you know, there's just no question that we as a country have to do something about climate action. And their recommendation is a market-based approach, a carbon tax. That, of course, is certainly on the horizon worldwide, but very big changes in how we produce energy, energy efficiency, renewable sources. Do you see or do you hear anything about how losing your own utility will affect your ability to be nimble and respond to some of these changing things?
Well, obviously, everybody reads about the president has said coal is no longer going to be a fuel choice in this country. So I think coming from the White House has pretty well set a standard as to what the issues are. But that being said, the biggest way to control consumption of anything is price. And so by driving the price down, theoretically, you're going to drive consumption up. And so therefore, the ideal scenario, if you want to adjust the goal and use Lake Worth as the example, you just charge 3 times what the market is on the electric. You've got your franchise, you've got to capture the audience. They're going to drive demand down, and so therefore you will address the issue. And so what I'm saying is it is going to be a function of price. What is being discussed now in these energy marketplaces, somebody's going to pay that price. It may be through your electric rates, it may be through, I don't know what it's going to be through, but there's no question that you buy a piece of the market for $1 million from me, and I get your $1 million, somewhere you've got to raise that $1 million. And so it's going to be reflected in somebody's price for some product, because we are a product-driven country. And that's the way I see it. So if you're trying to, if you want to go to that extreme, then the price in the marketplace will control.
Well, I think your example is a little disingenuous in that, you know, that's an awful heavy and crude hammer to come at it. Certainly you're right, and the economists will tell you that if you want to reduce consumption, you raise the price. But there are other clever ways of doing things, and there are other things changing on the horizon. At this point, the price of solar is actually less than nuclear. So, you know, things are changing, and I guess one of the concerns that I would have, obviously, Vero and Lake Worth share the difficulty of being an island generation. And we're surrounded by, as you said, someone who has rates that are very low compared to around the country. That makes a very different challenge, a difficult challenge. On the other hand, there are places that have chosen very different routes. Gainesville's chosen a very different route and became world famous for some of the things they put in place on demand reduction and on renewables. And they're their own utility.
They are, and they've done a very good job in
They've done
those
some very
cases. But they're,
things.
look at their rates.
47%.
What is that?
Look at their rates.
Look at their rates then.
I mean, because the renewables, and there's no question renewables play, and I count nuclear as part of that renewable resource that we have. And I think it's very important that we do look at, and continue to look at that. It may infiltrate the marketplace, but there are limitations as to what you can do with that. And, you know, one of the greatest areas for renewables, especially in wind and other experimentations, have been in the state of California. And their prices are low on the high side as well.
Andrew, I'm sorry, pressure. Excuse me.
Again, thank you, Mr. Conklin, for coming down and talking with us. You mentioned at the beginning when you came in, the city had hired a firm to buy, was it GF?
GAI.
GAI. What was the number that they put on?
I think it was 186 million.
186. And did they at all mention or foresee the issues you would have with the payments you'd have to make for getting out of the contracts? Was that part of that?
Oh, no, this was just a total valuation of the system itself as to what in their opinion, what would be the value. And that became a debated number for many months.
All right, so that would be one of the things that people would point out to you when they were saying that you were bringing in 35 net and looking at that valuation. But as you said, they were kind of all over the board with different methods of valuation.
And also, we arrived at our value, when I say $111.5 million, actually the number's in the neighborhood of $173 million, because we're requiring them to take down the power plant, that 14 million. We're requiring them to build the transmission to feed the city of Vero Beach in order to facilitate taking down the power plant. That's on the Florida Power and Light. So we put a lot of caveats in that added cost to their side of the equation, that add value that is not a dollar. We're not going to receive a dollar from that transaction, but we receive the benefits of what is paid for.
All right, and then I have one last question about, going back to the general fund and the budget gap. I was looking, I saw an article from back in March, so maybe some of the numbers have changed, but the finance director of Vero Beach estimated $2.25 million for the budget fall. There's another one that said, that it wasn't quite that much, 1.6. They all talk about different, perhaps you need a 56% increase on tax rate, or one says, it'd be more like 40%, another says it'd be up, even higher than that. I know they're kind of all over the place, but I appreciate what you said about trying to find savings. I understand that's the directive you have and the way you're going. But at the end of that process, once you've exercised all your ability to save and cut, at the end, you're probably going to have to increase some taxes somewhere along the line, don't you think, to make up for that?
Absolutely. I think as the city progresses, we're not going to be so nimble that we'll never have tax increases. So the answer to the question is, yes, we will have tax increases.
And your city has the flexibility to make those kinds of tax increases, if necessary, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're, the 10 mil cap that the state puts on, we're pretty far weird too.
Okay, right, and I mentioned that because I think our situation might be a little bit different than that. So, you do have that flexibility, and said, well, I appreciate you're trying to go through austerity measures and get savings every way you can. At the end of it, you do have some flexibility that if you have to make up a shortfall, you can increase your rates, and our city might not quite have that same flexibility.
Again, coming back, every city is unique and different, and you have to approach it from a unique and different perspective.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah, that was the question I was gonna ask. I know that your millage rate is around 2,
Yes.
and ours is around 9. So it's only, ours is only 4.5 times larger than yours. So obviously, your organization has a little bit of wiggle room. You have the flexibility and the opportunity to make a huge move like this. You have the financial means to be able to do that. And so it's a very, very difficult choice for anybody, whether you're at 2 mils or 9 mils. At the end of the day, the numbers have to work for you. And then there are some constraints for all of us to worry about.
I will put our conservative folks against your conservative folks.
City Manager?
Just a couple more comparisons to the millage rate. What's your valuation